Welcome to Best Decision Ever, where we believe that life comes down to very few moments and decisions. So on this show, we highlight the very people who have had the courage to overcome fear and make the decision to start that business, begin writing that blog, or just stand up for what they believe in hopes that we can learn their habits, routines, and mindsets and apply those to our own lives. For those of you who are new, my name is John. I'm your host, and today we have a very special guest. As a neuroscientist at a pediatric hospital, she worked to support the mental health of teens, and she quickly found that mental health support could be both more affordable and convenient. So she started Neoth, which is an online platform to support teens with personalized health programs. Since then, she's been named Forbes 30 Under 30 and has won the 2022 Uplink Mental Health Challenge. Without further ado, I give you Dr. Katherine Grill. Hi, Katherine. How are you today?
Hi, John. I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you for coming on. This is truly an honor, your expertise. I'm so excited to dive in. So let's just cut right to it, Katherine. What is Neoth and why is it so important?
Yeah, so Neoth is a mobile app and digital platform. It's a self-guided format. It really is meant to support teens and young adults with their mental health. So we're teaching them educational things about mental health, like signs and symptoms, how to reach out for help. We're teaching them coping skills, social emotional skills, and they really get to interact with other peers too and hear about their lived experiences to break down stigma. So it's very much so meant as a preventative form of mental health care, trying to reach young people before the point of crisis. And we also have AI systems to identify if somebody is at that point of crisis and get them to the care needed. But it's a self-guided mobile app. We built it up in partnership with a couple hundred kids, which was a lot of fun. And now we use the program at schools across the country, health insurance, financial organizations, kind of all of the above, different groups who are working with teens and young adults.
Okay. I like that a lot. And what sounds like what's unique about what you're doing is it's very personalized. Do you mind talking a little bit more about your personalized approach to mental health support?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been a lot of research coming out lately when you look at teens and their mental health, of course, after the pandemic, like that's just been in the news, but looking at their mental health and what they're wanting from programs and digital apps, and personalization is key. And I think at the fundamental level, it boils down to if something is more personalized for you, it's going to have a better impact clinically. You're going to see more results, and people realize that. Like if you're a patient in a program, you're knowing if it's working or not. So at the end of the day, I think the vast majority of teens want something personalized. Now on the kind of, I guess, front end, what you might see is a survey. Like we have a personalization survey on Neoth. They sign up, they answer a couple questions, and then we connect them with content and resources. You can almost think of it like Netflix, how they're personalizing content for you. That's what it feels like to them. But on the back end, there's actually a lot of science that goes into it. So by training, I'm a neuroscientist, and I think neuroscience is super cool because it really gets at the heart of what makes us, what makes us people, and what makes us different. And there's actually brain imaging that you can do, taking pictures of the brain to see individual differences. Like at the biological level, you and I would have really big differences in our brains, right? And that goes for everyone. And I think some of the issues that we're seeing, especially in psychiatry, for example, so mental health care when you're prescribing medications, is that they take a one-size-fits-all approach. So most people are familiar with depression, right? And antidepressants. Some people respond to antidepressants well, and a lot of people don't. And I think it's a really kind of easier case for people to understand because they all have the same condition, they're getting the same treatment, it only works for some people. The reason, and there's a lot of research on this, you can even look at Stanford, we're in the Bay Area, so that's like one of the big institutions out here. They're doing a lot of research on this. It boils down to those differences in the brain. And you can actually take a picture of somebody's brain and you'd be able to tell, okay, they have this subtype A of depression, they'd respond to the medication, but this person has subtype B, they might respond better to brain stimulation or cognitive behavioral therapy. So it really gets into looking at the biology and then being able to personalize interventions based on that. So at Neoth, what we do is we work with young people on building emotional awareness, stress management, stress and coping styles, so often before they get sick. But stress is similar. So there are these different subtypes, and what we can do is start to identify, how are you dealing with stress? What are some of the more, the clinical term is maladaptive coping styles, or maybe poor habits that they have for coping with stress. And then we can basically help them start to unlearn those and learn better coping styles. But it really, yeah, a lot of it can be seen actually as differences in the brain. So that means that one person might really like, exercise and being active and doing things for stress management. And another person really might like, reading with a cup of tea. Like there are so many different ways that we cope with stress, and it goes back to the neuroscience.
Okay. I like that a lot. What are some universal ways that, and I know it's hard because it's universal and it's more, you want to be personalized, but just for people watching, are there just some universally generally good things people can do if they are stressed that you've seen be successful across the board of teens?
Yeah, I think that I would say that there are maybe two phases of stress. So when you're in that moment when it's feeling like a lot of pressure and overwhelm and maybe even on the verge of panic, doing some sort of breathing or grounding exercise, because it's hard when you're in that moment, the emotions are really high, to kind of take a step back and do a lot of thinking, right? That's just not where you are. And that's fine. So I think you can sit on the ground, you can lie down, you can stand up, whatever feels most comfortable for you. Try to find a quiet place or a place where you feel safe and comfortable. And you can do even just some deep breathing. There are connections from the brain to the lungs and the heart, so nerves, and basically these organs communicate with each other. So when you breathe deeply, especially a long exhale, the brain is actually communicating with the lungs that you're safe, that things are okay.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it's a really, it's like this evolutionary kind of bypass to really quickly relax. So deep breathing, especially a long exhale, that's why there are a lot of those breathing exercises that are like count for 4 in, exhale for 8 out, or something like that.
Yeah.
It has to do with that neuroscience. So that's a really good way to kind of, in the moment, relax. I think afterwards, once you've had some space from the difficult situation and you've been able to kind of calm down a bit, that might be a time to think it through. What happened? What was the trigger there? Some people really like journaling and we have like on our app guided practices where it can kind of walk them through to identify really what happened and what they can do in the future. So it might be something like a self-reflection and then kind of planning, okay, if this happens again, here's what I'm going to do. But it also might be social support as well. That's really important. So it could be talking to a friend, could be talking to a teacher, could be talking to a parent. I think as humans, we're really social beings. Yeah. So being able to kind of talk things out, and it might not even be coming up with solution, right? It might not be like, John, I'm stressed, tell me what to do, but it might just be like, I'm stressed and I want to vent about it and I want that to be acknowledged by another person, and that can be really helpful too. So I think, the breathing exercises are great, the self-reflection is great, and definitely that community support.
Yeah. The last part really resonated too. Even it's just as simple as having a friend just acknowledge it, like, okay, like, yeah, that sucks, right? They don't even fix it or anything, but just having someone acknowledge that. So I appreciate that. And what behaviors should maybe people universally watch out for? Of like, okay, it's not, you call it a maladaptive behavior. Yeah. What behavior should people maybe not go towards when they are stressed? Maybe we should watch out for.
Yeah, maladaptive is a scary word. I know some people use very clinical doctor language, and sometimes I even like have an aversion to it as well. I'm like, I feel like there's a better way to put it. Like
bad habits works,
I think there are a couple. I think one that's really popular was another doctor word we call rumination, but it's basically worrying.
Yeah, it makes
so
sense.
If you're one of those people who's like sitting there and you're thinking it over and over in your head, so like maybe you had a fight with your significant other and you're like playing it back over and over and over, and it's actually getting in the way of you being able to interact with other people, do other things, fall asleep at night. Like that's an indication that something might be going on there. And what can be really helpful in that situation is a mindfulness exercise. A lot of times people think of mindfulness as meditation. It's actually not. They're two different things. There is mindfulness meditation, but mindfulness itself just means being in the present moment. So if I'm ruminating, I'm kind of thinking about something in the future, something in the past, but if I can kind of pull myself out of that and be in the present, whether it is through a meditative practice or it is through just like a walking mindfulness practice where you're really paying attention to what you're seeing on the street, you're just kind of pulling yourself into the present moment. So that can be really helpful if you're struggling with that worry. Another thing that we see, which is a very different kind of stress style, but I think also pretty prominent, is avoidance. So this could be that procrastination. I had a fight with somebody, I don't want to talk about it, I want to pretend it never happened. Like whatever it is, it's just too stressful to confront the situation, so I'm going to kind of withdraw and just completely avoid. And that can also be problematic, as we know. If there's a situation that's stressful, something is going on, it might not go away, right? At some point, you're going to need to confront it, and just kind of prolonging it can prolong your distress and the stress that you're feeling. So I think that that's something where those journaling exercises, those self-reflected exercises can really be helpful, because you can kind of force yourself to sit down and really think about the situation in a safe way, or also that peer support can be helpful. And then I would say the last thing that's a very different kind of stress dial has to do with trauma.
Okay.
So if people have experienced trauma, and a lot of us have in our lives for many reasons, especially, coming out of this pandemic, it actually changes the brain. So this could be something that's like a chronic ongoing trauma with children. You can think about, abuse in the home, or it could be something like a one-time experience, like a car accident. But even though it's just something that's so quick, if there is basically a lot of hormones surging, like all of that adrenaline, it can kind of change the brain and change your memories in the brain. And this is also something that shows up on brain imaging. So because the brain is changed, that means that you start to act differently in stressful situations. And one of the things that you might see, this is kind of characteristic of PTSD, can be kind of overreactions to things that are not stressful, or loud noises, or it can also be like a withdrawal. So sometimes people who've experienced trauma, they call it a freeze response. They just kind of completely shut down. The eyes can glaze over. They can just really even the posture, really kind of cave, and there's no confrontation at all. So that's actually a really different kind of, again, changes in the brain, biological response going on. That's usually an indication that you should work with a clinician on that. But you can see all of those are a little bit of, I don't want to say red flags, because honestly, we all do them, and the people who are listening are probably like, oh yeah, maybe I'm the worrier, maybe I avoid. We can all probably find our own stress style. But I think it's important because knowledge is power. Once you know which one you are, then you can start to figure out what might work for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. So especially just being able to better manage it and finding, again, as you mentioned, just the healthy ways of, if everyone's going to get stressed, right? And tell me if I'm wrong. Everyone's going to stress at some point. This is life, okay? But it's being able to understand what are the different habits you can go to that are healthy to manage it. So, what do you think keeps these types of topics, what do you think keeps these types of topics from just being talked about more in grade school and things like that? I feel like these skills are so vital, and I'm interested in this. I'm passionate about this one topic, and I didn't touch it till I was freshman in high school.
Yeah,
it took me a while.
Yeah, definitely. I think that a lot of it has to do with our culture and just the way the system is set up. If you look at mental health from a historical perspective, it's really been stigmatized. So imagine, a couple hundred years ago, people were maybe put in an asylum and kind of left there, right, and not given proper care. Even up into the 50s and 60s, sometimes there were these institutions where people were kind of left. And people are afraid of that. If I come out and I say that I'm struggling, that might happen to me, or I'm going to be ostracized by people that I know. I could lose my job. There's a lot of different kind of ramifications that used to happen. And 50s, 60s, that's not too long ago, right? A lot of people are still alive today who lived back then. So I think when you look at that, and then you also look at the way that mental illness has been portrayed in the media, think about Hollywood, think about all of the Halloween shows about insane asylums and things like that, or even just looking sometimes at sometimes I like to watch TV shows that the teens are watching, and I like to get a sense of what are they thinking? What are they getting from media, and what are they thinking is realistic? And things are so dramatized, and people are kind of glamorizing suicide or drug use and other things. So I think that there's this very skewed perception of what mental health is and how to get help, and that just comes from this systemic level. So all of that kind of comes together to impact the fact that there's stigma. And on top of that, we haven't even gotten into cultural issues, and how certain cultures have been mistreated by the medical system and are really hesitant to reach out for care, rightfully so. So I think this all kind of comes together in this system where it's just okay, we're not going to talk about it. It's not seen. It's not a physical condition like cancer. So we're just going to try to sweep it under the rug. And then what happens is, you've been seeing in the past couple of years, huge increases of depression, anxiety, teen suicide. I mean, you cannot sweep this under the rug because it's in your face. During the pandemic, Mental Health America, which is a nonprofit organization, did some research, and they found that 1 in 2, so 51% of teens were suicidal. And that's terrifying, because if you're a parent and you have multiple children, that means at least one of your children, right? Statistically. So, I think that it's this huge problem that's just really been swept under the rug. But if we can start to shift things, if we can start to integrate mental health into the schools, imagine your child is growing up and they're hearing about math and they're hearing about science and social studies and they're hearing about mental health the same way that they're hearing about these other things on a daily basis, and their teachers are talking to them. Here are some of the signs and symptoms when you should ask somebody for help. When your friend is struggling, how you can get them help. Here's a trusted adult in your system. Here's how you reach out for help, because that's a learned skill, and I don't think people realize that. But how to reach out for help, who to talk to, is something that needs to be taught. So if this is something that's happening very early on and it's just normalized as part of education, we can really start to reduce that stigma.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think too, especially the reaching out for help, you have to be a self-advocate, and not everyone's like that. So learning the skill set, you hit it right in the head. One thing I'm curious about is like how much of this, and this might sound insensitive, but I like how much of the mental health challenges we're seeing on a macro level in the United States is just caused by maybe like a lack of like resilience within our current generation, right? How much of it is caused, do you think, by that?
Yeah, I think that I like to view things as a systemic issue, because if there is a lack of resilience, I think it's not, the individual, sometimes we put the onus on the individual, like, well, you need to fix yourself. But if the problem is larger in society and all of these messages that they've been getting on a day-to-day basis, it's really hard to fix yourself. So imagine, for example, you're a young person, a young woman, and you grew up in the age of social media. And every day you're seeing hundreds of images of, photoshopped women and how you're supposed to look, right? You've been kind of conditioned from a very early age around what beauty is supposed to look like. And then, maybe you're 11, 12 and you develop an eating disorder. And these are actually really dangerous. It's one of the most deadly mental health conditions. People don't realize that. How much of it is just to say, Susie, you just need to start eating. Just forget about it. Don't worry about it. And how much of the responsibility really falls on us as the adults, society, these companies who are involved in some of these things that influence mental health poorly for young people. So I think that, yes, at the end of the day, each individual has power and has control. That's really empowering to hear. Like you have the power to, you can use a program like Neoth. You can get peer support, you can get community support if these things are available for them in the schools, and they can start to work on it on their own. But I also think there's a larger community effort that we're responsible for as the adults.
I would definitely agree with that. But the caveat, as you said, like it is very much also on the individual to want to go and seek whatever help it is, or whatever, just whatever system they need to create for themselves to stay mentally stable is also on them. Because I think a lot of people, when they go, oh, like I didn't get this, or my parents did this, or whatever, and it almost is like a scapegoat, but then they're trapped in their own like victimhood, right? It's a little bit scary. It's a little scary, which is not what you're saying, but I get what you're saying. I just, just for the record. Anyway, so let's transition a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about just how Neoth got started. What were, like, when you were in the pediatric hospital, you might just share a little more about, like, what were the unique insights that, like, led you to want to go and start this?
Yeah, so I was in Washington, D.C. I was at Children's National, which is the pediatric hospital there. I was doing what's called NIH research, the National Institutes of Health. So it's like a big government organization, and they oftentimes fund large clinical research studies across the country. So I was doing these clinical research studies with teens and young adults. It was a great job. I learned a lot about how do you create a health program, how do you research it, how do you validate it, how do you work with people in the community to make sure that the program is meeting their needs and is thinking about their culture and other things. So I learned so much from that. And at the same time, I was also working in the university. I was a professor teaching, and I was doing some more like public health work, so working with nonprofits in the area, trying to build up accessible in-person programming for young people to help with stress and things like that. So I had this kind of education background working in the schools. I had this patient care and clinical research background and this public health background. So I was able to kind of have my hand in a lot of pots, so to speak, and see the issue from multiple perspectives. And what I found was there was just really a lack of access to care. So think of something as simple as I'm setting up this, let's say, stress management class, and it's at the hospital and it's once a week, and it's free, right? So everybody should be able to come. Well, what about the young people who don't have a car? or who don't have enough money to afford bus fare to get there, or who have to work a job after school because, and they're taking care of their siblings. Like, there's a lot that goes into this that people don't always think about. And I think as doctors, we don't always think about in the health system. But it really is, again, as adults, as doctors, our responsibility to uncover these things and to make things more accessible for young people. So I started to see some of these problems happening. And I really started to hear and talk more to young people and hear about their preference for digital. And there are so many on their phone or on their computer. I think one of the great things about the pandemic is that a lot of schools have gotten Chromebooks or other computers for the students. So there are still some who don't have access to technology, but many of them do. So I think that's a way to reach them immediately, on demand, 24/7. And it was just something that I was really seeing, this might be a way to overcome some of these barriers that really make healthcare inequitable for a lot of people. So long story short, I did love my job, but I felt like it was time for a change, and left. I didn't know what I was going to do. I quit my job. I moved out here to San Francisco. I had no plan, and I just spent about a year diving into the space and just kind of, this is going to sound very California, opening myself up to the universe. But it was
I know, it's so true though.
I know, it's so true. But it's
true.
I was in, this is before COVID, I was in San Francisco 3 days a week. I was going to all these networking events. I was meeting other founders. I was just seeing, what are people doing in this field of technology? And is this something where I can maybe see myself going into?
Yeah, I want to highlight that you took the step to go, okay, I see this issue, and you were then courageous enough to go, okay, I'm gonna move across the country from DC to the Bay Area to go figure this out. What was that transition like for you? Mentally,
hard.
Emotionally? Yeah, what was it like?
It was hard. So I was in DC. I had a lot of friends there. My sister also lived there. I had a great job at the hospital, also at the university. And I think when you're working in those fields too, sometimes in academia, your path is laid out for you, right? If you want to become tenure track or something, it's very specific, do these steps. So transitioning from that very structured environment to something where I had no idea and there was all this uncertainty it was a lot. There were days where I felt really excited, and then there were days where I felt more depressed, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe I made a huge mistake. And I'll tell you, I didn't think I was going to found a company. I actually went around to a lot of the major mental health companies, a few which still exist, many who have since gone under, but startups, and I pitched myself, and I pitched them my ideas, and I said, I want to work for you. I can make this happen. I'm a doctor. I know how to do this. Give me a chance. And they all turned me down. Really? None of them wanted to hire me. Okay. None of them, which, I think maybe some of them are regretting at this point. But, I really tried. I couldn't break into the startup field. I was feeling frustrated, so I got a job teaching again because I was able to do that. But I kept going and kind of doing this networking and seeing what are other people doing? Maybe I'll meet a great founder, somebody I'll be able to join their team. And I started to realize, this is also very California, that people aren't afraid to just try things. And I think that there's some level of, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, some level of bullshit in the startup world.
You are
and
allowed to say that. Yeah.
Okay. So this is one example of this. So I'm a neuroscientist, right? I have a PhD in neuroscience. That's typically how you become one. I met a founder at an event, was funded, VC funded founder, was doing something in mental health and neuroscience, and was oh, I'm a neuroscientist. That's what they told me. And I was like, oh, where did you train? What are you doing? Blah, blah. Oh, well, I don't have official training. I read a book on neuroscience, and now I'm a neuroscientist. And I was like, oh. And I started to see that sometimes those things were happening. I think that the mental health field has a bit corrected itself since then, but 5 years ago, it was companies were popping up left and right. And it was a concern for me because people, I think, a health startup is not just a startup. It's not just a business, but you're actually going to be impacting people's lives, potentially saving people's lives. If you do something wrong, you might not save someone's life. So it's very important to have the right expertise. And I just started to gain up some of the confidence. I'm if these people can go out and do this and get funding, hell yeah, I can do this. So it was a bit of a learning process for me, but I just kind of kept going with that networking. And then ultimately I said, you know what? let's jump in. I'm going to do it.
I love that too. That phrase is always like, oh, if these people could do it, I can do it too. Yeah, it's very freeing. What do you say to yourself after getting, I mean, you're a neuroscientist, you're obviously very well spoken. After people reject you from joining their dinky startup, what do you say to yourself? Just what is the self-talk like?
Yeah, it was really hard at first. I was like 25 when I moved out here. I was younger. And I felt, for me, I'm so in love with what I do in my work, and it's such a big part of who I am, and it's part of my self-worth. And I think that's something, that's personally about me, but also around our society. So I recognize that. So that was really hard for me because I felt like people were turning me down, and I felt like there was something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a big part of my learning journey to realize it's not something wrong with me, it's maybe something wrong with the system. For example, when I come in and I look the way I do, I'm a woman, I present as a woman, I have blonde hair, people react differently. Like I even actually had one man just word vomit when I told him what I do and what I am, and he's like, but you don't look smart. And like he just kind of came out, and then he was like, "Oh,
boy!"
But you know what I mean? That's kind of the reaction.
Yeah,
so
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, but it happens a lot, and I think that's there's sometimes the blatant stuff, and there's all the microaggression, and I had to kind of really go through this learning process and realize that this isn't necessarily about me. This isn't reflective of my worth. Mm-hmm. It just has to do with other people. Not saying that all these companies are turning me down because they're sexist or whatnot, mm-hmm. but it wasn't the right fit for whatever reason, and I had to just kind of respect that and move on.
So, Katherine, the question of the hour, what has been your best decision ever?
I do think making the switch to California, I think, I could have kept at the university and the hospital. It was a good job. I could have done well, but my heart wasn't in it. I really wanted to have this implementation at scale and this kind of shift to changing things in society. And I knew I just couldn't do that from research, because the way research works is, you have a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 people in a study, and then you do another study, but it's never a huge sample. It's never millions of people. Yeah. There were a lot of obstacles, a lot of changes. It was hard emotionally, but I think it led me to where I am now.
Yeah. How did that decision change you personally?
I think I'm much more confident now around who I am and what I want. Like we just talked about, all those things where people are telling me, you can't do this, you can't do this. Beforehand, when I was younger, as a woman, I was in academia, people are telling you what to do, and there's a very clear hierarchy in academia, and you listen, right? And now I'm really starting to think more critically about, who are these people, and is this advice valid or not? So I think having that confidence, having that courage to push boundaries, try new things, especially when people tell you this can't be done, this isn't how it's done, that's how we make a better world. We say, you know what, that's not how it's been done in the past, but this is how I'm going to do it now for the future, because I want to make things better. So I think, that was really a mindset shift that was key for me.
Yeah, it's being more confident. It sounds like now you've gotten really good at just listening to your gut, really, rather, and this is going with it. I absolutely love that. One of the things I was curious about is, as a neuroscientist, at least even outside looking in, even when I'm talking to you, I'm like, oh, she's probably got all of her stuff together. All days are probably perfect. She's probably mentally, whatever. Like, how do you give yourself permission to have like tough mental days or have tough mental moments? Because I'm sure it's hard when you have this, you're a neuroscientist, people expect you to be a certain way. How do you do that?
People do. I've had a lot of people tell me on interviews, like, you're so calm, you must have no stress, and your voice is soothing, which I'm glad, because I've narrated a lot of practices on our app, so I'm glad I have a soothing voice. But I'm a person. I like to be upfront and kind of vulnerable about this, because we work with a lot of kids, and a lot of times they'll come to me and they'll say, Dr. Grill, like, I want to do this and I want to be like you. And it's very flattering. But I'm like, okay, well, let's jump into the why. Like, what is it that you want? And let's be honest about this, because I think there is a big problem with this influencer culture where we're posting everything and this is so great and this is so great, but we're not being true about the tough days. And anybody who's founded a company knows, like, there are a lot of ups and there are a lot of downs. I face no on a daily basis, whether it's like a customer, a partnership, and an investor. Like, something is happening where I'm being told no at least once a day, sometimes more than that. And you have to just kind of build up a thick skin. And again, kind of take a step back from it and be like, it's not personal, let's move on. But yeah, there are definitely hard days. I think self-compassion is a really good practice. So if people aren't familiar with that, it's like, think about the love and the care and the kindness that you would give to your best friend or your partner. Are you giving yourself that same love and kindness? And oftentimes it's not, right? We have this internal voice in our head and this critic that can be really harsh. So taking a step back, and there are compassion exercises on our app, but it can just be like reminding yourself, okay, I'm not perfect. I'm a person. I make mistakes, and you know what? That's okay. It's a learning experience. We make people kind of put their hands over the heart and say, I care about you.
I like that. I like that a
love
lot.
you.
I like that a
It's
lot.
going to
I
be
do like that a
okay.
lot.
And it feels weird at first when people do it, but if they just keep repeating that for a couple of minutes, it really starts to sink in. So I think just taking that step back, having that compassion for yourself, it might look like doing a 5-minute exercise and getting on with your day. It might look like taking half of the day off and, going outside we're in California, so surfing, walking, whatever it is, but taking that space for yourself, prioritizing your self-care and your mental health, that's really important.
I like that. And I will say the hands over the heart, like I do a version of that at night. And like as a man too, because like, it's like hard, especially macho. Like I literally say to myself in the mirror, I love you unconditionally 5 times. It's a systemized thing, has helped so much. So I can definitely speak to that. So permission to all dudes out there. With that said, how do you recommend people systematize those types of practices that would make them actually something that is like a vital part of their life?
That's the tough part, right?
Okay.
And I think that's what we've seen with a lot of other like mindfulness companies. Were probably some of the first mental health companies and really popular, but pretty low engagement rates, right?
Yeah.
I think there's some systematic reviews, so like peer-reviewed research studies are basically studies that scientists write, they get reviewed by other scientists, and then they get published in a medical journal. And there are some good ones that show it's about 4% of people will keep up with the app after the first month, about 96% will drop off. Yeah, so that's a lot.
Nuts.
That's a lot. But it's really hard. And you think about this, like if you're just signing onto a program and you're getting thrown a lot of content at you and you don't know where to start, and there are also programs that tell you, you need to do this every single day, 10 minutes, like how do you even do it? It's overwhelming. So this is where the personalization comes in. And what we do, we heard especially from young people, don't give me all this content, give me bite-sized pieces of content, personalized for me. Every month I can unlock new content, and also let me tell you how much I want to do this. Maybe it's just 1 day a week or 2 days a week. It's not every day. It's very well known in behavioral science, and this is why it's important to have scientists on your team, that if you set a goal that's feasible, you're more likely to continue. If you set a goal that's just very difficult, you're more likely to not make that health change, and you're also more likely to internalize that and feel a sense of shame. Like, it's me. I did something wrong. I'm not good enough. Yeah. It's not you. It's the program. The program wasn't tailored for you. So tailoring that program for you, we also make calendars for people so they can tell us, what they're struggling with, how many days they want to engage. We personalize activities, and then we actually put it on a calendar, and then we send them notifications when they have something on their calendar, and they can edit it. They can, adjust the calendar, but really making those little changes and then kind of holding people's hand and walking them through the process. And then again, having that self-compassion, like, if you didn't do it, that's okay. Pick yourself up. Let's move on to the next day.
Yeah, but make sure you do it the next day. Yeah, I love that. So before we ask the final question, where can people find you and learn more about you?
Yeah, so if people are wanting to connect with me personally, I think LinkedIn, Katherine Grill, you'll be able to find me. That's probably the best place to connect with me. If people are wanting to learn more about the company, Neoth, neolth.com. That's our website. We're also across pretty much all social channels at Neoth.
Okay, wonderful. So the final question, what advice would you give to someone that's on the other side of a big decision? Maybe they want to move across the country, start their own business. Maybe they just want to start a blog because, it's speaking to them, or maybe they just need to make a big change in their life. What advice would you give them?
I think going with your gut is something that I've always done. Sometimes I stress about the little things, and then it feels like the big things, it's just easier. I just jump into it. And I've always wondered why that is, but I think you can feel there's like an energy or just a feeling when you're thinking about this decision, and you kind of know, if it's something that it's pressing and you're like, keep thinking about it. And, you might feel a lot of emotions. You might feel nervous. You might feel scared. You might feel a bunch of different things. And that's normal. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It just means that you're making a change. Yeah. But if you're feeling this sense of like, I really want to try this, I would say go for it and think about in 5 years, or 20 years, or what will happen if you look back on this and say, I didn't do it.
Oh, I love that.
Are you
I love that.
Like, how are you going to feel about that? And if you're okay with it, that's fine. I think people sometimes are scared of saying no. You definitely can say no. I have to say no to a lot of things because I get asked to do too many things and I just can't. So it's okay to say no, but you're really kind of thinking of, who am I? What are my values? Where do I see myself later in life? And will I look back on this decision and regret it or not?
I absolutely love that. Thank you for deciding to come on the show, by the way.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
Thanks so much
Well,
for having me.
Thank you guys for watching. Go with your gut, understand your values, and I'll talk to you guys soon.